in the right screen now.
Okay, so I started recording, and just a few, just some housekeeping information. I'd like all of you to mute your microphone to avoid this noise that we might hear from your microphones, right? If you want to ask any question, you can use the chat box. It's at the bottom. You can ask the question. And if we're not able to answer the question now, we can help you later on, right? The webinar will be recorded, and the slides in the recorded webinar will be shared on our YouTube channel, São Paulo Open Center YouTube channel, okay? I'd like to introduce Alberto, Alberto from São Paulo Open Center. So sorry, Alberto from Cambridge Assessment English. He's the Senior Assessment Manager, and he's here with us to share some ideas on how to develop the core skills in remote teaching. Right? Thank you, Alberto, very much for being with us today. And I guess it's all with you.
Yes. I would like to thank you and São Paulo Open Center for this opportunity. And I would also like to thank all those fantastic teachers who are devoting some of their time to be here with us. I have been attending a number of training sessions and webinars as well by many teachers that are common to us, people that we know. And, you know, here in the audience, we have great people like Sergio, who's an ace at teaching online, as I said. We have Elo, who's doing a great job, you know, making all the adaptations. I could hear her last week in her presentation. And I would just like to check something, Andrea, before I start. What exactly can you see? Because in my screen, I can see some faces on the right. And I can see a green tab. Can you see that as well? Or only the screen?
You can minimize the faces. I don't know if you can see with the boxes with the faces at the top of that.
Yeah.
The first icon on the left, you minimize that and you don't see any faces anymore.
Yeah, Piri has sent me a screenshot. So. Of her computer, so I know what you got now. That's good. So thank you very much. Well, when Fatma invited me to talk about developing the 4 skills in remote teaching, I had mixed feelings. I have to be honest. I was both thrilled because it's a great opportunity, and I know. Quality of the work that São Paulo Open Center does, and I know the quality of the professionals who work with São Paulo Open Center in their prep centers. It's quite a challenge. But I also felt, oh my gosh, this is a real challenge to face. But we have been somehow teaching remotely for that opportunity, maybe not in every lesson like we are doing now. But here I am to share some thoughts with you about teaching the 4 skills and making some adaptations for the online environment. But one of the things I would like to mention is that when we're talking about teaching remotely, especially in this scenario where we can see, for example, teachers not teaching remotely because they were prepared or the institutions had planned to do it, but it's emergency remote teaching. I can hear some background noise somewhere. Maybe if you could mic your microphone.
All the microphones, but
yeah. Now it's better. Thank you.
Right.
So when we were not fully prepared to face the challenge that we are facing now. So when we're talking about emergency remote teaching, like Mirella mentioned last week, we have to consider a number of adaptations that we need to implement in our everyday teaching, especially because when we're talking about those adaptations, some institutions and some professionals are facing different realities. So it's not the same for everyone. Some of you or some of the institutions might be subscribing to a platform that has a number of features. Some of you may not be connected to platforms which are so sophisticated, so we have to make a number of adjustments. But when we are talking about teaching the 4 skills in remote teaching, even though we need to consider all the adaptations, we cannot forget that the 4 skills are the 4 skills. So we are going to start each of those skills that we're going to talk about briefly because we have 60 minutes to cover 4 different skills. But what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to consider for the productive skills, speaking and writing, we're going to consider criteria, especially the Cambridge criteria for those skills. We are also going to consider what it takes to develop those skills and some adaptations for remote teaching, right? So I hope this is useful to most of you. So when we're talking about the 4 skills, we're going to start with the speaking skills. We're going to start with speaking and writing first, then reading and listening with the adaptations. We cannot forget, as I said, the nature of those skills. So when we're talking about the skills, we have to consider that the criteria will not change whether it is remote or face-to-face. So, for example, when we are assessing speaking skills, we have to consider things like grammar, range and accuracy. We have to consider vocabulary. We have to consider organizations of ideas and supporting ideas as well. We have to consider things like pronunciation and fluency, and of course, interactive communication. For each of those things that we need to develop with our learners, when we're thinking about the remote context, we have to make do with what we have. In some cases, you might be able to develop interactive communication skills because you can, for example, put students in breakout rooms. Sometimes you don't have these opportunities, so you have maybe to add to your resources an external resource that will allow students to interact, maybe some kind of instant messaging app or website, or maybe some kind of platform where students can interact and exchange ideas with each other, right? So in terms of speaking skills, one of the things that we talk about in speaking is the difference between fluency and accuracy. And why am I bringing this here? It's because when we're talking about remote teaching, we can, for example, draw upon some of the things that might be overlooked in the face-to-face teaching, which somehow makes, which is somehow some sort of advantage to remote teaching. But let's talk about this bit by bit. So fluency, according to Scott Thornbury, it's not so much a matter of speed of delivery. Why do I like this definition and why do I bring this here? Many of us and many of our students have the feeling that speaking fluently is speaking quickly. But when we are teaching remotely, we have the general interferences. If we're talking about the students' homes, their families, and a number of people doing so many things at the same time, speaking online is somehow similar to speaking when you are giving a lecture. You can't just speak very quickly just to show that you are fluent in the language. You have to pause, you have to speak more slowly, you have to pronounce the words more carefully to articulate the sounds so that your speech is clearer. And in online communication, this is very important for teachers and for learners. But going back to the definition of fluency, it's not just about the speed, but it's more to do with the length of the run. So the more words you can put together without pausing. And when you're talking about accuracy, it's according to Thornbury, it's judged by the extent to which the learner's production matches some sort of external standard. The traditional view was the output of an idealized native speaker, but it's judged by the assessing a learner's command of linguistic systems. So their mastery of grammar, the range of vocabulary, and how clearly they can articulate the sounds in order to make themselves understood. So we are not talking about speaking like the ideal native speaker, but we are talking about being intelligible. And in remote contexts, we have to make ourselves intelligible. Sometimes we have the aid of the video, sometimes we don't, it's just the voice. So we have to consider those things and bring those things to our students when we are trying to develop the speaking skills in class. So in general, uh, what do students need in order to be able to communicate effectively? They need to know the meaning of the language. So in remote teaching, we have to consider how best we can convey the meaning of the language. One of the advantages of remote teaching is that because technology nowadays allows us to access an array of images, graphs, uh, a lot of programs like PowerPoint will also allow you to create a number of visual clues to help students make sense of structures, maybe highlight sentence or word stress. So making those things visual for the students. They need a model of the language in a meaningful context. And when we're talking about meaningful context, we are talking about where the language is used: dialogue, songs, stories, rhymes, chants, role play, and puppet shows and visuals, etc. Here we can see lots of contexts where language appears, both for young learners and for older learners or adult learners. They need clear instructions and they need a model of what to do. When you're talking about remote teaching, the model is perhaps the key thing in order to give the students the task. They need very, very clear model in order to be able to perform in the language. They also need plenty of opportunities for repetition of the target language. All those points, they are also true for face-to-face teaching, but in remote teaching, the point of repetition is really important because the device will allow students to repeat in spite of teachers' instructions. So by helping the students to learn how to study, by helping the students to become autonomous and helping them with individual practice, this repetition can become even more frequent in the students' learning, which is not only the opportunity they have to practice the language in the classroom. And they need a lot of feedback on their production. And feedback, I believe, is the most important point in remote teaching because they need a lot of formative assessment. They need feedback on the little steps of each of the tasks that you set. They need feedback, constant, continuous feedback on how they are performing in the language, speaking or writing, etc. So providing students with the opportunity for formative assessment is very important. And most of all, along with formative assessment, keeping the records of this assessment, both for you, for your institution, for the students, for the parents, etc. So when we're talking about skills, we need to consider language aims. The language aims will not be lost just because we are now teaching remotely. The aims themselves may be readjusted. Maybe what you targeted in a certain number of hours in the classroom was a certain level or developing certain skills. Because we have had to make all those changes instantly, we might maybe need to adjust our expectations, maybe lower our expectations, but we cannot forget that the aims will always be the aims, right? So I'm bringing here the Common European Framework of Reference and a description of what students can do at levels A1 and at levels A2. Why am I bringing this? Because usually when we look at tasks that are proposed by our course books, or maybe the tasks that the students are going to be doing in the exam, we say, okay, I need to develop this task, but in order for the students to perform, even if it is a simple speaking task, there are a number of things that we need to build. And I think in remote teaching, we can provide students with opportunities to build even more. Uh, so this is just a bigger version of the competencies that are expected at levels A1 and A2 according to the CEFR. So we can see here that at level A2, the description reads, a student can manage simple routine exchanges without undue effort. They can communicate in simple and routine tasks requiring simple and direct exchange of information. So here, what I'm going to do is, this is a task that we want to set to students who are developing skills at A2 level or who are already at A2 level. The task is, one of the descriptions, one of the descriptors in the CFR reads, at level A2, students can give a short rehearsed presentation about whatever topic. I just put my family here as an example. They can briefly give reasons and explanations for opinions, plans, and actions. So when we think about giving a short presentation about a family, we can say, that's an attainable task that can be easy for the students. But one thing I like about this descriptor, and I think it's very important to consider in remote teaching, is the word rehearsed. When we are preparing to give a talk or to deliver a webinar or even to deliver our own lessons, we rehearse a lot. Maybe we don't rehearse by teaching the lesson again and again, but we rehearse parts of the lesson. We practice the sequence of the things we want to present. We go and revise the sequence again and again before the lesson or before the webinar, before the presentation. So in order for the students to be able to do this in speaking, they have to master a number of things. For example, knowledge of contextual vocabulary and pronunciation skills. So they need to know, for example, the members of the family in English. They need to know how to pronounce this language that they will need for this presentation. They need vocabulary for the sentences that they are going to construct in order to give reasons, opinions, plans, explanations. They also need knowledge of adjectives, including possessive adjectives in their position. So they need to be able to say, and this is my father, not father my, etc. They need, a number of adjectives, and they need to understand how to structure this in a sentence. They need knowledge of simple verbs, including the verb be and have. We are talking about level A2 here, so those verbs are very frequent at this level. They also need knowledge of how to express and justify a simple opinion. For example, I get along with my brother because, or I like my brother because, etc. And they need also presentation skills. So it's not only about the language, but it's about developing some skills in order to present. We can see people fiddling with the board here, experimenting with the platform. So these are called components. So for each descriptor, we need this that we call composite of competencies that we need to develop in order for the student to be able to do this task of giving a presentation about a family with reasons, explanations, for opinions, plans, and actions, etc. So When you're talking about speaking, we have to consider that for us to be able to help the students to achieve this, we need to provide enough preparation time. And for this preparation time, this includes teaching language, practicing the structure of a presentation, helping the students to personalize the language. We need a clear orientation to the task. So they will need a very clear model of how to do it. They will need maybe a presentation frame, and by using this frame, they will just be personalizing the information, and this will give them the confidence to, give this short presentation. Well, we need topics that are motivating for the students, and usually common topics at A2 level, things that are around them, part of their routine, their lives, will be easier for them. And we need a follow-up to the discussion. By follow-up here, it could be, for example, students interacting and commenting on each other's presentation, or the teacher also providing some feedback, etc. So these are, as I say, some key points to remember in order to help the students develop the skills. Again, they're also valid for face-to-face teaching, but we are going to consider the steps for remote teaching. So in order for us to do all of this in speaking, we have to consider that for meaning, we need to use pictures, and we need to avoid long explanations. So one example that I give to illustrate this, especially online, is, for example, if you have, we teach containers to students at a certain level. So if you want to illustrate the difference between jug and jar, if you have two images there on the computer, it's much easier than to explain how to use a jug, what a jug looks like, and how is it different from a jar. And the reason why I bring this example is that we have here a false cognate, which is jar, and that confuses the students. So bringing clear pictures for that. If possible, when you follow the stages, like, for example, teaching the language, practicing vocabulary, pair students or group students in breakout rooms. But if it's not possible, try to consider some alternative tools for this. If you don't have access to a platform with breakout rooms, things like Padlet or Flipgrid will allow for tasks and communications and communication activities. Padlet, for example, allows you to post audio files, which is good for speaking. And it's also good for short video clips that you can use. Flipgrid is something that teachers can create. It's a grid that teachers can create. And the teacher will include the students in the grid. So students can communicate using short videos. So they can leave video messages, and then they can respond to each other messages by using short video clips. So that you would need a mobile phone for this. And a WhatsApp group might do as well for audio messages, maybe for videos, but we have some drawbacks with WhatsApp. For example, we teachers might not wish to share our WhatsApp number with our learners. And that's not very practical in many ways, because if you have a big number of students, it will be really difficult to manage. Whereas through Padlet or Flipgrid, you can create different Padlets, for example, or you can manage the conversations on Flipgrid. So it gives you this chance to this opportunity to manage. For very young learners, we will need the support from the parents, because a lot of the tasks will include repeating, etc., maybe singing a song, maybe saying, short sentences, or maybe singing a chant. And depending on the kind of technology that you are going to use, the parents, the support will be crucial. And we know, like we heard from the last session with Mirella, parents have a lot to deal with. They are also learning and adapting to this new reality. But we need to include the parents for young learners or very young learners here. And in case your context will not involve synchronous teaching, that is, you don't have a live moment with the students, we have some opportunities here where students could, for example, maybe through handouts that you set. Can you please mute the microphone, everyone, because of the noise here? So if you're not live with the students, you have the option to, for example, encourage the students to practice by submitting tasks, and then you check that they know the language, and then you provide a sentence frame for the students to rehearse, and then students can practice extensively, and you can make agreement with the student for them to only send you the best version of their task. What's the advantage of this if students are doing this remotely? Is that as they are trying to come up with the best version of the task to send you, they are unconsciously repeating, practicing, and as they are repeating and practicing, they are articulating the sounds of the language, which means they are practicing pronunciation, maybe repeating after the model that you have sent to them. So we have to consider all those aspects for speaking, developing speaking skills, if it is synchronous, asynchronous, etc. If we have platforms with certain features, if we only have platforms with limited features, etc. So we have a number of things to consider. In terms of writing skills, uh, writing in real life, we have, when we write in real life, there are three key things we cannot do without. We need to know what we are going to say. Pardon my spelling here, there's a word missing. We need to consider how we are going to say something, and we have to consider the effect of our message will have on the reader. One interesting thing about writing nowadays is that writing is not only about using text. We, in inverted commas, write in many ways nowadays because we add a number of icons, emojis, so we communicate our feelings in different ways. We have also the common abbreviations as well. And the thing is how to use each of those features depending on the genre, depending on the kind of writing, and then considering the context, the register, etc. So the criteria for writing from Cambridge Assessment English focus on content, communicative achievement, organization, and language, right? So we have here some quick, very brief definitions of each of those points. And when we're talking about writing, one of the things that we do face-to-face in the classroom is considering an approach to developing writing skills. In this case, I'm going to bring the approach of process writing, where we have three main phases. We have pre-writing, writing, revising, and editing. So for each of those phases, we have a number of things that we can do. So here are some examples of things that we can do in the pre-writing phase. Here are some examples of things that we do in the writing and revising phase. And here are some of the things that we do in the editing phase. So when we're talking about face-to-face teaching, most of those things could happen. I would say could happen because that would depend on the level of the learner, on the type of task that we are setting. If we are talking about young learners, the tasks are very short and quick. If we're talking about advanced learners, going through those phases might take more than one lesson. So I'm bringing those points here because uh, by looking at those stages, we can stage the amount of tasks we set students when we are teaching remotely. So uh, After we go through all those phases, we have the moment where we publish the final version. And this is very interesting with writing, because when we think about process writing and the criteria, the common criteria for assessing writing, we have things like content. And then we can consider, have the students done what they were asked to do? So we turn the definition that we saw previously into questions. Communicative achievement, is it formal, is it informal, etc.? Does it meet the communicative achievement, the effect on the reader? How about organization? Is it in a logical order? And language, is there a range of structures or lexis? Is the language accurate? So we are looking at the criteria and the stages in process writing, because let's imagine that you want your students to complete this task, right? Again, a task at level A2. You want to help your students to write a good story, and you suggest the task below. So this task is now a valid task for the new A2 key exam ever since January this year. So they have to look at the pictures, and they have to write a story. So if we are setting them this task, then we need to consider the stages for them to do this remotely. So for example, in the pre-writing phase, we will need things like brainstorming, and then we need to plan things, and then we need to select ideas. And then by doing this remotely, we have to consider how we're going to do the brainstorming of ideas. First, if we're talking about synchronous teaching, we can show the image to the students through the computer. And then we might need to consider some sort of tool for them to share their ideas. If you are using Zoom like you are doing now, you can open up the microphones and students can communicate. If you don't have this option, the students can chat their ideas in the chat box. And then we go to the other phase, which is planning and organizing. For this, we would need some kind of collaborative tool for them to use, maybe something like Google Docs, where students can collaboratively build a text, right? And then in terms of selecting ideas, this could be the result of the discussion. And then we need to consider the feedback from the teacher. Some sort of online tool like Google Docs will allow you to give feedback on the student's language and to make comment. Maybe you could send individual students certain messages, giving specific feedback about certain things. And then if we are talking about something like Google Docs, instead of exchanging drafts, they are already building one draft together. In the classroom, we have circle writing, but maybe this might not be the case in remote teaching. So we need something. One thing that you may be familiar with is the platform Write and Improve. Write and Improve allows the teacher to create a classroom, which they call workbook. And through this workbook, the teacher can monitor the students' process in terms of developing the skill. So the teacher can keep track of their writing by looking at the sequence of drafts they have written. And the platform automatically gives feedback, but through this feature of Write and Improve, which we call Class View, the teacher also can add to the feedback from the platform and give the students grades and keep the communication going. The good news is that this feature of Write and Improve is available for free for teachers, for, for teachers to use for 2 months. So by bringing the students together in the platform, students can write tasks, and then the platform will give feedback on the task, and then the teacher can view the feedback, can view what changes the students have made in the editing phase. So we can go through all those stages by looking at the students and having the platform correct the work and the teacher can add to this feedback. And then students can come up with the final draft. And this will be good for formative assessment because you can keep track of their development progress in the task through the platform, right? So when we're talking about lower levels where the students are not ready yet to write texts, we can think of, for example, helping the students to write in English by setting them spelling activities. So by showing this on the screen, students could either use the chat box, or if you have the classes with microphones open, they can shout out the answers. But since we are talking about writing skills, the best thing would be typing the answers somewhere. Again, if you don't have the opportunity to do this online, you can make use of an external tool like maybe Padlet or Google Docs, where you can view students' production, right? Here's another example of something that you can do with young learners. So you can show images, and the learners can organize the letters and practice spelling, because we are talking about lower levels. Maybe also you might be familiarized with some kind of online activities which allow students to click on the letters and put the words together, because nowadays there are many sites or tools that can help us with this. So another activity here is Madlib. Is something that we can do with students in class, but depending on the level, let's say, for example, A2 and above, you can stage a Madlib with the students online. So a Madlib is, in very broad terms, is a crazy text that you can build together with the students. It's a very good opportunity to give the students an idea of the structure of a text. Just to give you an example, I have staged this Madlib here. So let's imagine that we are in a lesson. So I would do for part one a dictation. I wouldn't show those words to you, but I would ask you to write those numbers here on your computer, mobile, or piece of paper. And then instead of writing these words, you would write what the information requires. So if I say, for example, number one, a celebrity. So can you shout out the name of a celebrity here?
Neymar.
Okay. Another one?
Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga.
A verb with ing.
Speaking.
Okay. All right. A place.
New York.
Recife. Okay. New York.
Belém do Pará.
All right.
Belém do Pará.
Okay, so in this case, we wouldn't be doing this speaking. Students would need to make a note of those bits of information that is required, right? And then I would start dictating a short text. So for example, one was, you mentioned number one, Neymar. Neymar was two. You mentioned the verb with ing, speaking. In the, or in Belém do Pará, or etc., etc. And then students would complete this, and they would read, or they could show the text to each other online, and they would come up with a funny text which doesn't make much sense, but it could be fun. However, the idea here is not to stop in the text that they write, but it's to give the students the structure of a text. This would be one of the stages, and then the next stage would be, now you are going to personalize this text by including information that is about you. So students are going to rewrite the text telling a true story. And then you would have already given them the structure of the text, right? So Madlibs could be done stage by stage remotely with the students. So adapting writing skills for remote teaching. So when brainstorming ideas, allow students to make notes on the virtual whiteboard or in the chat box. So I can see some people making some doodles on the whiteboard. If possible, pair group students in breakout rooms for brainstorming and assign one student to collect notes. If not possible, use alternative tools. Padlet, Google Docs, Google Keep, write on paper and show on camera. So, you know, you have to be very creative if you don't have the right technology. For very young learners, spelling games, they can write on paper and show on camera if it's not electronic online. For asynchronous remote teaching, Padlet would be good because they could post Google Docs, write and improve because you could set tasks and then you can keep track and it doesn't have to be synchronous, right? Again, encourage the students to redraft and submit the best version of their task. And by redrafting, they are practicing, and developing these skills. So for reading skills, in a nutshell, when we're talking about developing reading skills, we have different ways of reading things, right? So this is just a very, very brief recap. We have things like careful reading, where we have to pay close attention. It's linear and slow, and you need accurate comprehension of the main ideas. It's like, for example, if you're trying out a new recipe. If you're trying out a new recipe, you have to do a lot of careful reading because every bit of the text will be important for you. You don't want to put twice the amount of salt in your dish, right? So you have to pay close attention. We have fast reading, and fast reading is something that has become part of our everyday life because we are always doing fast reading by looking at messages quickly on the mobile phone. Sometimes you make quick decisions about whether or not to respond to them, looking at quick numbers, emojis, etc., and making sense of meaning very quickly. And search reading, when you do a quick search for detailed information, looking for particular meaning rather than a specific word, right? So the reason why I'm doing this recap, it's because we have reading skills that will depend not only on text, but on other things, like, for example, images. So look at this task for young learners. What reading skills do they use to complete this task? So can you can you share some ideas? Can you say something about the skills that they use to complete this task?
Scanning.
Okay, scanning. Can you give me an example of things they will be scanning for? Mm-hmm.
The armchairs, a big window.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So when we're looking at this task, right, students have to use a number of skills. They have to be able to read the sentences that you can see here. And they have to be able to make sense of what's in the picture, right? And then they have to compare the sentences and the image in order to be able to complete the task. Apparently, a very simple task, but it demands some sort of sophisticated skills for students to complete, right? So let's look at this task again. The way we were looking at it, it was the task in the test mode, where by looking at the task, students are expected to respond to it, and we are not considering the stages that led students to be able to do this. In the classroom, in remote teaching, we have to go back a step and consider in the test, students do not have to do the tasks from memory because in the test, they can always refer back, look back at the picture, right? In the classroom or in remote teaching, however, you can help the students to develop the skills in order to achieve this. by breaking these tasks. So let's do an example here. So you can, for example, focus on the picture only. And in remote teaching, if you do synchronous, you have the opportunity to, for example, tell the students to look at the picture and then give them some time to study the picture. Then later, you show the sentences about the picture, and then you get the students to read the sentences and decide whether they are right or they are wrong, yes, no. And then together with the students, you can build their understanding, and then tell students to read the two sentences and then decide if they are right or wrong. Then you can check the answers with the class. And lastly, you can give the students instructions. Okay, you have some more sentences, and then read them and say yes, no. If we are talking here about synchronous remote teaching, where you are together with the learners, right? We have to make some adaptations if we're not doing it together, but it's very good to look at tasks that are ready-made in the course book, in the workbook, or maybe in a mock exam. And then you can bring the task one step back and work on developing the specific skills. The teaching is remote, but we have to develop the skills all the same, right? So lastly, students could show or they could type the answers. They could show the answers on a piece of paper in the camera, or they could send the answers to you, or they could type the answers, or you might wish to ask students to shout out the answers if you have them with microphones, right? So this is just, we can do a similar thing, but with a higher level group of students. In this case, we can, for example, work with the text. We show the text. We do a lot of eliciting about what's in the gaps. And if you're doing it like this remotely, only at this point, if it's not from a workbook or a course book, only you will have control over the text, so they don't need to go to the options right now. So they can read, and then you can do eliciting. They can type their guesses, and later you give them all the multiple choices, and then they can work either in breakout rooms or individually. If it is asynchronous, you can maybe break the task, send them the text, they guess, and then you send them the options, and then they send the answers afterwards. So adapting reading for remote teaching, make sure that when brainstorming ideas, allow students to make notes. If possible, pair or group students in breakout rooms for brainstorming, and then assign students to collect notes. If not possible, brainstorm ideas during the live moment. And then if the live moment is very short, you can assign the reading task for asynchronous practice. And you can use alternative tools, for example, Google Forms, SurveyMonkey for older learners. All the students can write their answers on a piece of paper and show on camera. For very young learners, they can shout out, or, sorry again, my spelling, or write the answers on paper and show it on camera, right? And for asynchronous remote teaching, Google Forms, SurveyMonkey, you could also do poll lab, like doing polls to see which possible answers or which answers students focused on most, and why you think that they go for that preposition and not for the other one. And then you can use the results of the poll to maybe go back, revisit that item of lexis or grammar, etc. Right? So if we're doing multiple choice with older learners, like the text about chocolate, polls can be good to gauge what they can know, what their guesses are for the multiple choice. Listening skills. Well, one thing about technology nowadays is that technology is always leading us to keep listening to things. We are always Maybe ideally it would be in English, but in English or in our language, we are either watching a movie, we are going to YouTube, we are listening to an interview, the news, etc. So there are technology offers many ways of exposing us to audio files. So in terms of features of listening, and I would like to revisit this, the thing about listening is that listening is a very difficult skill to develop, like reading as well, because the process in listening and reading happens in the student's mind. Uh, oh, the doodles here, sorry. So the process in listening and reading, it happens in the student's mind. So we are the ones who need to mediate this very, very carefully to ensure that we give the students the opportunity to process information, either listening or reading. But in terms of listening, unlike reading, the input is transitory. So you don't have a record of what you hear. You heard, and that's it, right? It happens in real time, so you need to store while you are analyzing information, and you need to carry forward information in the mind very quickly, because in reading you can always go back. You can go to the previous paragraph, reread, etc. Not the case with listening. Speech rate is not under the listener's control. So if it is interaction, you can ask the person to speak more slowly, rephrase, etc. But if you're listening to a TV program, the news on the radio, podcast, or a lecture, you don't have this control. And there's a lot of variability. So people pronounce sounds and words differently. And usually students start learning, listening to the words word by word. But then in listening, this is all in combination. So all those features of connected speech will impact understanding. And there is this thing, you don't have the gaps between the words in most cases when you are listening. So we see sometimes a group of words will sound like one word, right? And not only that, but listening has a process that is being carefully researched more and more nowadays, which is those levels of processing. We have perceptual processes. So we start from a lower level with input decoding, that is trying to make sense of sounds, trying to make sense of the words that you hear. And then you have lexical search, which is making sense of words together. If the words together, they will mean one thing, like an idiom or a phrasal verb or a prefabricated chunk, or whether the words, they are together, but each word will mean something different. We have syntactic parsing, which means trying to make sense of the structure of the language while you're here. And then we go to conceptual levels for higher levels. That is, we go through meaning construction. So we focus a lot on the attitude of the speakers, interference, logical connections between things the speaker said, if you are listening to more than one person, until we get to discourse construction, right? So we notice that points 1, 2, and 3 here, they relate to lower levels, and points 4 and 5 to higher levels. But we need the lower levels processes a lot in order to develop the conceptual level processes, numbers 4 and 5. Just to give an illustration, listening is like this. If somebody says to you, the sun is rising, it could mean different things. It could mean literally the sun is rising, or it could mean it's time to wake up. That would depend on context, that would depend on the intonation of the speaker for you to make sense of meaning. I mentioned a number of features of listening skills when we started talking about listening, that they are true to listening in general. But during online remote teaching, we need to go back and reflect and maybe adjust our mindset towards those features and those skills. For example, we can say that listening is transitory. There is no record of what you hear. But if we are setting a task remotely and students have access to the recording, they can they can go back to try to understand. They can go back to try and make sense of words, sentences. They can go back. They have more power over this. So this is good for those processing stages in points 1, 2, 3 that I mentioned in the previous slide. Listening happens in real time, it is true, but when we're talking about remote teaching, and for example, you set maybe a TED talk for students to hear, or if you're working with young learners, there is a chant that they need to listen to and manage the gestures along with the song, etc. It's not real time. You can go back maybe to try and analyze what you are hearing more carefully. And then that will help you carry forward information in the mind more slowly and with even more confidence, right? It says that the speech rate is not under the listener's control. It's not true in remote teaching if they are accessing the audio on their own. And if we are doing synchronous teaching, the teacher can also get feedback from the students to say, okay, shall we go back? Shall we focus only on this part of the dialogue, etc.? So you will have control. And of course, variability, this will not change only because it's remote, but because you have control, you can focus more on those sounds and words that will sound differently. For example, maybe strong sounds or stress sounds in isolation will be weak in speech. And you can also, maybe because you have the control, you can, for example, pause to maybe spot the gaps between the words, and that could help you practice and sensitize your ears to those features and sounds of the language. So with listening skills online, you have a lot more control, right? So in terms of listening skills, activities, especially for processing stages 1, 2, and 3 that I mentioned, things like discrimination quizzes could help. For example, you could use dictations online like this, and then the student have to say, teacher, you are saying A, or teacher, you are saying B. So you say one of those things like, she wants a present. Is it A or B? And then you can get the students, can help the students to sensitize their ears to listening. And because we are doing it remotely, we need very, very clear articulation. So do the students. You can do, for example, stress activities for things the students have just listened to, not necessarily the words that you are teaching today, but maybe things that you felt would be interesting for the students to focus on, to draw their attention to some stress features. For example, certain words which might have shifting stress if an American is saying it, or if a British person is saying it, for example. So you can maybe, as a follow-up to the listening, create sentence or word stress for that, right? Well, do we have time for questions, Andrea? Let me know.
Let me just open my microphone here. Well, time is up already, but yes. I don't know if anybody wants to ask any question. I just had one question that I saw here in the chat box. It comes from Beatriz, in fact, in the sense that she was asked to keep to one platform only when teaching students, because they They are overwhelmed with, teachers and students are overwhelmed with things to do. So handling different platforms might be troublesome.
Yes,
And
Beatriz,
something.
can I say something about this point, Andrea? Beatriz is absolutely right. You have to stick to one platform or one tool with learners, because what is new for us teachers is also new for the students, is also new for the families. The reason why I mentioned different options here, it's because when we have a wider audience of teachers, we have teachers teaching in different contexts. For example, I've been in touch with institutions that are delivering lessons, but they are not synchronous. That is, there is no moment when there is not a moment when the teacher is live with the students. Everything is recorded on the video, and then the students access the video, and then they access some supplementary material that comes together with the video lesson. So we have other cases where institutions are using platforms which allows for lots of interaction possibilities. So because I'm talking to a wider audience here, I'm giving different alternatives for different contexts, but you are absolutely right. If you are using one platform, stick to it, because you need to create this routine on the learners and with young learners, on the learners and on the family.
Thank you, Alberto. There are lots of people praising, thanking us, but no other questions.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I have been a teacher for almost 2 years now in regular schools. And the situation in regular schools is a little bit different due to different platforms. But my concern is how to engage students, because the students are not used to this kind of remote teaching. So we will need some more time in order to engage them fully. Are there any hints for us? Should we lower our expectations at first and then go steady? I'm saying this because in Recife specifically, not in the rest of Brazil, but in Recife, the vacation for regular schools are happening right now. So we are on vacation for April. And then we're going to restart classes in May, and we're not going to have July vacations. So that's going to be hard. But I am considering the fact that many students and many parents are going to be very vocal on not wanting to do things. And I would like to know if there are any hints that you could give me regarding engaging both of them, because I know that I need to engage parents in order to engage the students. Are there any ways that we could do that?
Well, Djalma, right? I wouldn't say, Djalma,
Yes.
at first lower standards, but I would say lower expectations, in the sense that at first, students, families will need to get used to the new dynamics of learning remotely, right? Will you be synchronous with the students, or is it fully remote, like you don't have a moment with them online?
Well, there is no decision on that yet, which is very worrisome. But to my point of view, I believe we should have both. A moment, a synchronous moment, and an asynchronous moment, like a mixed kind of methodology.
Yeah. So,
and this is what I'm going to be offering the schools, right? But I still don't know what their position will be.
There isn't, Djalma, a recipe for this, because as I mentioned, and as many texts also show, Mirella last week shared with us a blog post that she wrote, which has a link to a very interesting text about emergency remote teaching. One thing that, this is not a recipe, but one thing you need to take into consideration is, staging things even more. Because, for example, when you go to the school, students already understand the dynamics and how to behave in the school setting. At home, there are many things that will affect this. And at first, there will be a lot of, I don't like at this point, I don't like the expression trial and error, but I would say trial and reflection. So you would need to talk to the students, you would need to propose ideas, you would need students evaluation on the ideas. So it would be good to get their feedback. Difficult, not difficult. Metacognition is something that has to be taken into consideration. For example, teaching the students how to study, teaching the students how to
Right.
learn once they are at home. We tend to assume that students will already have those cognition skills in place. Well, when they come to school, they know that under the teacher's guidance, they have to behave like this and like that, and they will have to do the task that the teacher set. We set them time limits, for example, but remotely, we don't have these opportunities. So there will be a moment there for also, instead of coming up with all the content to teach immediately, teaching them how to handle the new situation, the new dynamics, right? So teaching them how, for example, to make use of an online dictionary for learners. We understand that students go straight to Google for anything, but we have good advanced learners or learners dictionary, which bring information that is curated. The examples there are not open examples like the examples from Google. They are specific examples for learners to help learners understand and make better sense and learn more quickly by making use of those pedagogical tools. But we have to teach them how to access those things and how to make use of those things. So there will be this moment of making sure the students and families know how to go about their learning. And then once this has settled, we can start with the ordinary teaching of content. But yes, there is a transition phase there.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
I was just typing an answer here. Is there any other question that you would like to ask?
I like to ask.
Yes, Milena.
Hello, Alberto. I'm Milena.
Hello.
We have met in Ribeirão Preto. I have a school of idiom where we teach children, teenagers and adults. But for
I
the
remember.
children, yeah,
I remember
me too.
we had the conversation.
Yeah, it was really good. And we have children at the age of 3 to 5. These children are really hard to be taught online or remotely because they don't stand sitting. They need to move around. So we have come to a strategy. While face to face, they have 2 hours a week of classes separately. So 1 hour in a day, 1 hour in another. So we are tending to suggest moms that we have half an hour for 3 children, and after the half an hour for another one, other 3 children, considering for the 2 hour class in a week. Apart from this strategy that we are coming up with, would you have any other tips to add for these children at the age of 3 and 5?
Yeah, I would like to support the idea of shortening the contact moment with the child, because 1 hour would definitely be too long. We know that, for example, in the classroom with very young learners, especially at the beginning of the year or when they come back from the holidays, we need to go back a few steps to reorganize the routines again, right? And with online learning, the great difficulty is the child at home focuses on the dynamics of the house. So they don't focus on the dynamics of the school, which is something that will need, first of all, a lot of understanding from the families, and we also need to prepare the family for the tasks, right? So helping the family to help the child to continue with the routine of meeting the teachers on those days and times, and then doing tasks, and also allowing the family opportunities to do certain things in English with this age range that they can practice when the child is not in touch with the teachers. For example, a lot of those things that we do is we do a lot of singing, we do a lot of movements, etc. So we can help the family to, for example, before going to bed, they have to practice the song, and they have to make sure the body moves are correct according to the song. So, just to help the young learner to revise and refresh this knowledge from that they are getting from the moments they are with the teacher. But yes, shortening the lesson from 1 hour to half an hour will benefit.
Yes, thank you so much, Roberto.
So I guess we need to finish because of the time. Some people have to leave, some of them have already left. So I'd like to thank you, Alberto, very much, and Cambridge Assessment English for all the support you give us, not only to São Paulo Open Center, but to all our preparation centers and partners that we have over here. So thank you very much for your support. And I'd just like to tell you that next Tuesday at the same time, we'll have another webinar with Bettina, Doutora Bettina von Sta. She's an expert on teaching online, and she'll be talking about assessment and managing time when teaching online. The talk will be in Portuguese, como fazer a gestão do tempo e avaliar na educação online. So we'll be sharing the link and hope to see you next Tuesday at the same time from 5 to 6. Okay?
Thank you very much as well, Andrea. And thank you everyone who made themselves available to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.